everybody. How's it going? Good. All right. I think we can start. We're close enough. Cool. Welcome. I realize I'm the only thing that stands between you and the raffle and the after party, so we'll keep it fun and brief. How about that? This session is called Works on My Machine. It's been a while since I've done a session because of the pandemic, and when I did this, I realized later on this is a rookie move as a speaker because this doesn't mean anything. What is this talk about? So I apologize. My titles need some work. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. People here from Atlanta? Is that most people local? Everybody's from Atlanta? Anybody not from Atlanta? Oh, whoa, okay. So I heard Chicago. Where else? Savannah, okay. Say again? Oakland, wow. You know they got conferences in California too, right? A long way for a conference. Houston, I grew up in Houston. Well, Sugar Land. Missouri City, yeah. I went to Elkins. Where'd you go? Hightower, where is that? Is it new? That's a new, I think that one wasn't there. It's newish, okay. Where was that, like Lake Olympia area, Vicksburg? Vicksburg, oh man, you and I are from the same grounds, man. Same streets. All right, very cool. This session is called Works on My Machine, and we're going to revisit the oldest joke in programming. And hopefully, I'm going to show you how we can end this nightmare for good so that future generations of programmers will have to come up with their own excuse for why their code doesn't work. My name is Burke. I work at Microsoft with the VS Code team. It's the best picture I have of myself, so I figured you'd like me to zoom in on it a little bit. You're welcome. While we're going to talk a lot about VS Code today, I need to provide the appropriate disclaimer that I do not speak officially on behalf of Microsoft. Okay, now that being said, everything that I'm about to tell you is 100% true, absolutely the right way to do things, and without error in any way, so just accept it uncritically as the gospel truth. As part of my work on the VS Code team, we do a lot of TikToks and YouTube Shorts. Look, the world's gotten really weird in the last 2 years. I didn't think I'd ever be on TikTok, but we are. So like and subscribe and all those things people yell at you to do on YouTube. If you would, if you're a VS Code user, we do a lot of tips and tricks and things. Stuff like this. Let's see here. Will this work? Let's see if this will work. Brushing your teeth is optional. You don't have to do it. You know what else is optional? See? Yeah, TikTok's a lot of fun. Also, though, I need to give you a warning. That app is designed for you to go in there and never come out again, right? So you'll be in there for hours, and then realize it's 2 a.m., right? So just be careful with that. It's addictive. Brushing your teeth? Okay, buddy, we already saw that one. We do some other stuff that's more helpful, though.
Wouldn't it be great to highlight some code and get an explanation what it means? GitHub Copilot Labs now give you that feature. Highlight some code and it shows up in the sidebar. Then ask Copilot what it is and you get a plain English explanation. But what if you don't know that programming language? Well, you can also ask Copilot to translate the code into one you know. For example, from JavaScript to PHP.
All right. So, by the way, anybody using Copilot in here? Couple folks, do you like it? Me too, because sometimes I'll be writing and it will do exactly what I was going to do, only slightly better. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with all this. No, all right. All right, so this is me, and this right here is my code in the background here that works on my machine, but I can virtually guarantee you that it will also work on your machine. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. He uses a light editor theme. I understand, but listen, I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will learn how you can, with a remarkable amount of ease, isolate and ship your entire development environment. In fact, I'm going to show you how you can take your whole development environment and check it into GitHub, okay? And then anybody else could just pull it down. Your whole machine, right? Sound good? All right. First of all, though, I want to talk about this phrase. Where does this come from? This works on my machine. Who was the first person to say this? I did a little bit of journalistic research here, and I discovered that nobody knows. And I can relate to this. I've actually, I assume everyone has either said this in their head or out loud. Okay. And it's almost like, you know how you don't have to teach kids to lie? They just sort of figure it out on their own. You don't have to teach a developer to say this phrase. They will just utter it at some point, and when they do, it will feel very natural, as if they had just invented it. So I didn't find the original attribution, but what I did find was a blog post from Jeff Atwood, who is one of the guys who did Stack Overflow, where they announced the Works on My Machine certification program. It's the first internet reference I could find. And apparently they made this badge in PowerPoint. I don't know. Someone with my level of graphic design skills did that. In any event, it's fitting subject matter in this blog post. They said that all you had to do to get the certification was these things. Compile your application code, launch the application, cause one code path to be executed, and then check the code changes into your version control system. Now, I feel like this is onerous and unnecessary. Really, for me, it's much simpler than that. If you can get literally anything to run at least one time, you have earned the Works on My Machine achievement. You have unlocked it. Now, my first experience with this was VB6. Anybody else ever touch VB or VB prior to the .NET? What's the first version of VB you ever did?
I can't quite remember. Honestly, some of our tech debt is migrating VB into C#.
Really? Lucky you. Wow. I really liked VB. VB is one of those languages where you can just sort of like write code willy-nilly and it just works, right? Like there's not a lot of structure there. But I had my first experience with this whole Works on My Machine phenomenon is I had built a program, and as I recall, it was a phone book program, and this is before we figured out we could run websites, and I'm dating myself here a bit, but I built an actual application that people could pull up. I worked in a factory, and the front office people could pull it up, and it would show them who else was in the office and what their phone number was. That's all it did, okay? That's it. And so I got this thing on a I burned it. Remember this, burning CDs? I burned it to a CD. I took it in, and I installed it on everyone's computer, and then they went to execute it, and boom! Has anybody ever seen this before? Right, people who have seen this are laughing because they know. This is ridiculous, right? So why? Okay, well, this is my first foray into figuring out that your computer has runtimes that mine does not have, and it's very difficult for me to predict what you've got and what I've got and the differences between the two, right? Like, I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. Every developer knows that this is a nightmare, but it's the nightmare that we live in. Okay, but it actually gets worse than this. Has anybody ever worked with Ruby on Rails here in this room? A couple Rails folks? All right. Now listen, this is not a slam on Ruby on Rails, but just say, when I was trying to learn Rails, I spent most of the time just trying to get Ruby to run on Windows. Yeah, I see some nods. That's it. That's it. It was so difficult, right? Because it wasn't really designed for Windows, and none of the commands were for Windows, and so I had a lot of trouble doing that. Now, the fundamental problem here is that we have to be able to, in order to fix this, we have to be able to isolate the entire environment that is required to run a thing, right? And that thing may have a lot of different requirements that it needs to run. And then we need to be able to take that and easily move it from point A to point B, right? From one person to another, or just anywhere that we like. Now, there's a technology that already does this. It isolates entire environments and processes so that when you deploy, you know for sure that everything is going to run. Does anybody know what we call this technology? Containers, and more specifically, Docker, right? So just so that we're all aware here, if you don't work with containers, Docker is something that works, but it shouldn't, okay? That's the only way I know how to explain it. With Docker, what you do is you have a file and you write some markup in it, and in there you basically define an environment. And you can say it's Linux, and it's got this software in it, and then when you actually run that container inside of it, it looks like an entirely separate operating system, right? But it's not. It's just a container. And again, I don't know how this works. I just know that it does work. It's kind of like a virtual machine, but very lightweight and with no interface. So this used to be a huge deal because containers have revolutionized how we deploy software, but they can also revolutionize how we build software. And that's what we're going to talk about. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how Visual Studio Code enables you to develop inside of a container. Now, the important thing here is that you don't want to be a container expert to have to do any of this stuff, okay? Actually, you don't really want to know about any of the container stuff, and you'll note about, when we get in there, you'll see that. People, right, DevOps people, people who work with Docker, container people, they know a lot about Linux and about containers, and that's a whole level of knowledge that we don't want to have to do this, right? We're just trying to build software. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is we need 3 things to make this happen, right? 3 things that you need to install, and then you should never, ever have to install anything else ever again to get software to run, theoretically. The first one is Docker. The second one's Visual Studio Code. Third one being remote containers. How many people in here are already using Visual Studio Code? Hopefully everybody. Anybody using something else? Ruby mine, okay. So are you actively doing Rails, Ruby development? Very cool, very cool. Yeah, Visual Studio, that's another great one too. All editors, this is the best time to be a developer, y'all. The tools are amazing. Most of them are free. Like, you can't lose. You can't go wrong no matter which editor you choose. Okay, so that's it for the slides. Everything I'm going to show you from here on out is going to be pretty much demos in Visual Studio Code. So yeah, let's do it. All right. So let's jump over here. You should recognize this. This is Visual Studio Code. If you don't recognize it, it might be because I put my sidebar on the right here. And I'll show you why I do that. So when you're working with Visual Studio Code, one of the things that you'll do a lot, as you probably know, is you will do this, where you collapse the sidebar and then you expand it, right? This is just a Command B action here. By default, the sidebar comes on the left like this. So watch the code when I expand and collapse the sidebar. What's it doing? See how it moves around? Now, you don't realize this, but your brain is accounting for that, right? Your eyes move, your brain repositions, and it resets the context. It just does it really fast. But there is cognitive overload there, or overhead there. If you do this, now look, watch the code. See what happens? Stays put. That was for free. You don't have to pay me extra for that. I've just increased your productivity by 1 millisecond a year. You're welcome. All right. So we have this. This is a Python project. Any Python devs in the room here? Okay, please observe my code uncritically. I'm not a Python developer. For those of you who are not Python developers like me, this is not about Python. This is just the language that we're going to use to show you how we can develop in environments that we might not otherwise be familiar with. In this case, this application is a web app. It uses a framework called Flask. And this is all the code that's in the app. All it does is it loads in a JSON file and it displays an index file. So to run this, right, I pulled this down from GitHub. What we would do is we'd come here and we would read these instructions. And then what we would do is open our terminal here. And we would, we would try to follow these instructions about doing the dependencies and then starting the application with Python. And yeah. Wait for a second here. There we go. Don't be scared by that error. I have some sort of like a Xcode thing going on. Thank you. So, this just happened while I was prepping for the session. It's like, install the Xcode tool. So I did, and then it just keeps doing it. Thank you so much. I'm afraid to open Xcode, though. I don't know what I'm doing in there. All right. So if we tried to run this app with Python, like this, okay, so we've all seen this before, right? So at this point, we have to go out and we have to install Python. Or do we? So what we're going to do here is, let's zoom out a bit. We're going to add in what we call a dev container configuration, right? So we talked about this extension that we've got, which is called remote containers here, and I've already got it installed. And we talked about Docker, which you can see is running here, right there. So we have those three things. And so now what we want to do is open this thing in a container where we're going to define the environment. So how do we do that? And again, we don't want to have to know anything about this underlying technology. We don't have time to learn Docker. Okay, so we're going to open the command palette in Visual Studio Code, and we're going to say add development container configuration files. Now, when you do this, Visual Studio Code is going to look at your project, and it's going to try to predict from that what you might need. Okay, so it's looking at my project, and it says, looks like Python 3. And it is. But there's a lot of other definitions in here. If we do show all definitions, there's all kinds of stuff like, want to do Ruby? There's a Ruby definition back there, right? What else? Somebody throw something out, .NET, right? So you can basically find any sort of framework or language that you want to work with, and you can pick that here and get a container definition. So we're going to do the Python 3 here. And it's going to ask us which version of Python we want exactly. So we're going to use Python 3.9 for this session. And then for some reason, it wants to know why or what version of Node we want. I suppose you can't build an application in 22 without Node. I don't know if that's science or what, but we're going to say no because we don't actually need Node. And then it wants to know, hey, are there any other features that you want me to put in this environment, okay? And these are things like the AWS CLI, or even better, the Azure CLI, right? Okay. .NET CLI, Java, right? Ruby, put Ruby in here, Rust, right? So all the things that you might need, you can sort of just compose your own environment here by checking these boxes. Now, I'm not going to check any of these boxes because that just makes it longer for the container to build. So I'm going to skip this, but you know that you could do it. We'll say, okay. Now, what happens? Something happened, but it happened really fast. So what it did was it put a dev container folder in our project, which is right here. Now, before we get into this, what we want to do here is rebuild and reopen in a container, okay? So I'm going to select that. Visual Studio Code's going to reload, okay? And now it's going to start building my container environment here. And if we, the log's already gone. So it's pretty quick, right? Now, I'm not running anything else, so it's pretty fast. I also didn't choose any features there. If you choose Ruby, it takes like 15 minutes, okay? Just fair warning. The first time, every subsequent time, it's almost instantaneous, as you'll see. So this looks like I'm still local, but I'm not, okay? So this is, if we actually look here, I'm going to do who am I, even though we don't need that because it says it right out to the left. We are the VS Code user. If we look in the terminal here, this is what my terminal looks like, right? So who am I here? I'm Burke, right? And here we have no Python. Here, what do we have? Python 3.9.13, right? Because that's what we asked for. All right, so just like that, we're up and running, ready to work with Python. We've installed no Python. Now, the reason why this is great is because as a developer, you usually spend a lot of time cluttering up your machine with stuff you do not want, okay? You're like, I really want to run this, but I don't really want Python. Too bad, right? You want to go through this tutorial, install Python, MySQL, Laravel, right? Fill in the blank. Okay, so we don't have to do any of that anymore. Now, let's talk about what's been added to our project here. So it's added a folder to your project, which I'm sure you would appreciate or not appreciate. Either way, it's there. You can think of these as like configuration files. So you got two files, okay? One of them is a Docker file, which we're going to click on, and then we're going to nope out of here real quick because that looks really scary, okay? We're just not going to mess with that. Instead, we're going to come over here to the devcontainer.json file. So what we've tried to do for you is we realize that while the Docker file is doing all the work, Docker relies on this YAML markup language. and it's very difficult to learn, and it's unforgiving, okay? If you get it wrong, the thing just won't build, and you won't know why. And so what we try to do is abstract that for you into a configuration file that is a format that you might be more familiar with, which is JSON, right? It's just easier to read. So what we have here at the top is this specifying the Docker file, which is the one it added for us, and then the variant, right, which is 3.9. Now, if we wanted Python version 3.10, you know what we have to do? That's it, right? You want 8? Let's go that way. You want 2.7? Just put 2.7, right? And then rebuild your container, and you have it, and it's there. We're not going to do that because it takes a few minutes, but that's how easy it is to toggle between versions of Python that you want. And again, you don't have to install different versions of Python on your machine. So what are some of the things that we can do here? Well, first of all, let's run this application just to see how it runs. So I'm going to open the terminal, and then what we're going to do is run python app.py. This is probably going to fail. Yeah. So we need to install our dependencies first. So let's come here to our README. What does it say to do? Always consult the README. Copy, paste. Copy and pasting things into your terminal, always a great idea. Nothing could possibly go wrong. All right, so we've just installed our dependencies. If you're not a Python user, that's all we did. It's like an npm install. And then we're going to run it with python app.py. Okay, so now it's running, and it's telling us it's running on port 5000, and we're going to say open in the browser, and there we are. Be highly impressed with my web design skills. It's actually the Bulma CSS framework. Has anybody heard of Bulma? A couple folks heard of Bulma? Bulma? Y'all, this is the best CSS framework that nobody knows about. Go check it out. It's called Bulma. This is for free. Y'all are welcome. I think it's a Dragon Ball Z reference, although I never played. Okay, is it? Okay, yeah. And I think this is the guy that made it, but yeah, check that out. That's Bulma. All right, hold on. We're getting sidetracked. All right, so we have our application that's up and running here, and you'll notice that it's running on port 5000 up here at the top, just local address, right? So it's exactly what you'd expect if you're developing locally, local address, and then some port. If we go back to Visual Studio Code, you can see here that we've got this ports tab. This is new. If we go over here, what it's done is it's automatically detecting things that are running in the container, and it's forwarding them from the container to your local host. Again, you would have to do this. If Visual Studio Code didn't do it for you, you'd have to do this, but we're doing it for you so that you don't have to know about networking inside of Docker containers. So this configuration file gives us quite a bit of control over just about everything. So let me show you. First of all, these settings here are VS Code settings, and I don't know what any of this stuff is. But here's what I do know. This is like an optimal Python environment for you, and that's what we're trying to set up, okay? Otherwise, what you would be doing is Googling, like, why doesn't this work? Why does my linter work? You know, I don't even know what's an AutoPep 8. I don't even know what this stuff is. Anyway, but we can set other settings here as well. So let's say we don't want people changing the location of the sidebar just to look cool. So we're going to put it back on the left where it belongs. And then, is there you know what? Maybe we want to do a theme. What's the theme? How do you do the workbench theme? Color theme. Say we want to set that to something really nice. Hot dog stand, beautiful theme. Y'all ever seen hot dog stand? You're really going to enjoy it. Okay, so we're going to move the sidebar to the left. We're going to change the theme for everyone who uses this project. And so to have this stuff actually work, we want to rebuild and rebuild our container here. So we're going to rebuild the container. Our project's going to come up. It's going to be a lot faster than it was the first time, hopefully, because we're not actually changing anything. All we're doing is moving the sidebar and changing the theme. It's this beautiful red color. Listen, it's not a serious theme, but if your coworker ever leaves their computer unlocked and you have a chance, don't pass up the opportunity to install a hot dog stand on someone's computer. All right, so let's get rid of this. This is awful. But the point being, like, once we start making these changes, It's relatively fast, right? You want a quick, what we call interloop cycle, where if you need to rebuild the container, you want that to go pretty quickly so you're not stuck waiting a lot of time on these changes. All right, so what else can we do here? Well, one of the things that we can do is that if we want this thing to just work, then we need to install dependencies for people, right? Because that's a step. And there have been many times in my life where I have said, your project doesn't work. And people are like, did you do npm install? And I'm like, I did not. Let me go back and do that. So what we can do is take care of that for people here. So we have these lifecycle commands that are built in. And one of them is post create. So after the container gets created, we can actually run this step for people so that they don't have to do it themselves. What else can we do here? Well, let's take a look at this. In our index file here, under templates, we have what is called a Jinja template. That's just the name of the templating engine for Python. One of them is Jinja. You might be familiar, what are some of the handlebars, razor, it's kind of like that. But there's no tooling for that out of the box, right? So we don't get any syntax highlighting. HTML doesn't recognize this. And if you're running something like Prettier, it gets really upset. By the way, do y'all see this? You see the, watch the top of the file. As I scroll, you see how it gets sticky and it stays? Ooh, that's sticky scroll. We just released this in Visual Studio Code. It's a brand new feature that we're super excited about. We think you'll like it. We hope you like it. Hope you'll let us know. Okay, so we want to add in an extension for this that does this highlighting for us. So if we go to our extension gallery here and we look for Jinja, this is sort of the one that people use here, but we could install it, but what we want to do is add it to our devcontainer.json. And again, we don't want you to have to do any of this work, so we just give you this nice right-click menu, add to devcontainer.json. It's been added. If we go over there and up to our extensions, it's now there, okay? And if we rebuild our container, it will go ahead and it will do two things, actually, and we can look at the log here. So right now it's doing the pip install, so it's installing our dependencies, so the person never has to do that. And then the other thing it's going to do is going to add that extension as well, which we're done here. And if we come back to our index file, I should be using my shortcuts here. Now we have syntax highlighting over here provided by the Jinja extension, right? So we can include extensions for people in our project that are going to make them more productive or that they need to run the application. Okay, now, one of the problems is, though, that this terminal doesn't look like my terminal, and you probably would feel more comfortable in your terminal with your plugins. I don't know, how many folks in here are using Windows? Wow, just a couple. Okay, so everybody else is like Linux, Mac, everybody's ZSH? Folks using ZSH, quite a few. All right, do y'all customize your terminal? Okay, yeah, it's like the first thing I do. So we can do this. Why does it say spam caller? If it knows that it's a spam caller, why is it sending it through to me? Does this happen to y'all too, where it says spam caller? No, just block the call. Like, you know, who's like, no, spam caller? Absolutely. What's up? All right. So to do this, what we can do is, and I wrote an article on this, but you can take your dot files and you can put them in GitHub. Just like a really snobby developer thing to do, but also a very practical thing to do. And again, I wrote an article on this. If you want to check this out, you can come to my blog here, right here. We'll talk about that. But what we can do is go into settings. So my dot files are here. So we're going to copy this in. And then we can come into settings. Let's get rid of this terminal. And then look for dot files. Oh, you know what? Because we need to reopen locally. So we're in a container. Now we're back local. We can always tell that from the left, the remote indicator here in the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to go to settings. We're going to look for dot files. Yes, see Git's not installed. That's great. Right here, and just paste this in. Okay, so now we want to rebuild and reopen it in container. And now what will happen is Visual Studio Code will go get my dot files and will automatically configure that in my container so that when it pulls up, it's my terminal, right? It's got my ZSH settings in it. Everything is there. It feels like my machine. Because while you do want to be able to ship your machine around, you want it to feel like your machine, right? And so this is a setting that's local for me. So if somebody else pulls this down, they're not going to get my dot files, right? See, that's my terminal, right? Looks like my terminal over here, right? That's my terminal. And so if you do this, everybody's version of the container will look like your terminal and not like someone else's terminal, which is what you want. Okay. So we've got all this done. We've done all this stuff. Now we want to ship it, okay? We want to get it to people. Where can we use this in the wild? So let's do this. Let's put it in GitHub. So first, to do that, we need to initialize a repository. And I don't know if y'all know that you can do this, but in Visual Studio Code, you can basically do all this stuff from the editor, right? So I'm going to initialize the repository here, and then let's just say this is our initial commit. If I can spell. And by the way, actually, let's do this. Let's watch this, because I forgot. I wanted to show y'all this. There we go. Really? Oh, you know what it is? It's just this right here. So if you want to change the default branch that you get in Git, this is controlled by the Git CLI. We get this question a lot for Visual Studio Code. Like, I want my default branch to be main. If you do it on GitHub, it will be main. If you do it in Visual Studio Code, it won't, because we just take whatever the CLI gives us, okay? Because we just rely on the CLI. So to fix this, you can do git config global init default branch main, okay? And that's the only time you have to do it. It's like kind of like setting your name, and then from then on, you got the main branch. Okay, cool. So now when we initialize the repository, okay, see down here in the corner, we have a main branch. So that's how you do that, in case you're curious. And again, it's kind of a set it and forget it kind of thing. Yes, we can't actually, if you could go and do like a PR or open an issue, that would be phenomenal. I don't know, I think it's on Git to change that in the CLI as well. I don't know what the deal is there, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think it's something that we could do. I don't see a reason why we wouldn't be able to do that. All right, so we're going to commit here. And then also, I don't know if you know this, but from Visual Studio Code, you can publish your project to GitHub without having to create a repository, okay? We'll do it for you. So just click Publish Branch, and we're going to call this Works on My Machine. Say publish to public GitHub repository, and boom, we're doing it all for you because we love you. We don't want you to have to create a repository and then come back and do it here. So okay, so let's open on GitHub. So when I said we're going to put your entire development environment in GitHub, it's kind of clickbait, right? Yeah, it's 2022, y'all. Got to get you to pay attention somehow. So all we're really putting in there is these two configuration files, which you should recognize by now. But, watch this. You know what Codespaces is? Familiar? For those who aren't, we're going to create a Codespace in GitHub. Codespaces is a hosted version of Visual Studio Code running entirely in your browser. And then the compute is provided for you from GitHub via a container, okay? So what's happening here is it's setting up the code space that we're about to use. And this will allow us to develop anywhere, any browser. You got a Chromebook? Good enough. iPad? Good enough. Totally fine, right? You don't need a full-on machine anymore. And so that's what this is going to do. Now, here's what's super interesting. That dev container configuration that we created, Codespaces uses that same standard to build the code space. So whatever you build on your machine, when you put it up into Codespaces, you're gonna have the exact same result in the browser. So anyone else who runs it. So this is an open specification. The dev container specification is open source. And there's a lot of other people adopting it, but you can see here as we come in, we don't have our dot files here, but our container, yes, I get it. Something wrong with Git. Our container is exactly what it was before, okay? It's exactly the same experience that we designed because it uses that same exact container specification. Dev containers are a super powerful way for us to isolate environments. I'm curious, though, from everybody else here, would you picture yourself having a container for every project, or would you rather have one container that you put all of your projects in? Does that make sense? Like, would you want to have a different environment for every project? I mean, it's great if I can give you this Python project and I'm like, hey, rock on this, and you're like, I got it, I can go, right? I don't need to sit with you and set it up, you can just run it. But this is something I'm curious about. Like, is this the solution? Or would a better one be, to have one container that you just take with you everywhere, and you're like, this is my dev, where I do all my dev. Okay. So I've taken you through sort of like this whirlwind tour. If you want to go through this on your own, we have a tutorial that walks through the exact same steps that I just did, okay? So you can go through, do everything that we just did, sort of on your own time, get this set up. The hardest part of this is getting Docker working on your machine, right? That's really it. If you can get Docker up and containers running, it works well. The second caveat is you need a little bit of beef on your computer in order to actually run containers, right, on your local machine. So you need some compute power. So if you're trying to run Docker on a low-end machine and it's taken forever, that's why, okay? Containers do take a little bit of work there. That's all I have for you, though. I want to thank y'all so much for being so gracious and coming and smiling at me and giving me feedback. Y'all were wonderful, and I would be happy to answer any questions or chat. Thank you so much. And I'll leave this up. Sure.
Because you were kind of talking about GitHub Copilot. When I was doing a little bit of research, it seems like similar to IntelliSense or IntelliCode. Is that?
Yeah, it is. Okay. Yeah, it's very similar. IntelliCode tries to focus more on like anticipating what you might do and honing the selections. So it looks like when you hit the dot and you get that IntelliSense, it says, okay, well, based on what the code they're writing is, maybe they want the log function, or maybe they want a request function. Whereas Copilot is like, what function are you trying to write? Like, I'll just write the whole thing for you. So it's just sort of two different approaches, like both of them using AI, though. It's a great question. People in here using Copilot? We talked about that, right? In case anybody's interested as to what that actually looks like, scary is the answer, and awesome. Let me show you. If you want to stick around, we'll do something. I always do this as like this is funny to me, I guess, but like you go into a code interview, right? And they're like, hey, why don't you invert a binary tree? And you're like, okay. And then, see here. Oh, is it not shared? Oh, sorry. All right. So you can come here in the comments and be like, invert a binary tree. Okay, and then, where's Copilot? You can ask Copilot, let's see. Where is it? No, it should be enabled. Is it Control Enter? Yeah, there we go. So it's basically, you can see it down here, it's spinning, and it comes back and it's like, I don't know, maybe you want one of these? And you're like, yeah, you're like, cool, I'll take this. Boom, binary tree inverted, hire me. Create a function, now it's kicking in, that inverts a string. I'm just taking whatever it's giving me, right? And it's just sort of, and you can do weird stuff with it too. Like you can ask it like, I don't know if it'll answer me or not. Hello. Actually, Q. Hello? Hello. What is your name? Now it's doing the questions and the answers. My name is Bob. Okay. Now it's John. My name is Bob. What is your quest? To seek the Holy Grail. So look, it's a lot of fun. If you haven't messed with it, it's pretty cool. Anyway, thank you all so much. I won't waste any more of your time. Thank you so much for coming. Y'all were great.